Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. When you use Apple Card on your iPhone, you'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Apply now in the Wallet app on your iPhone. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs, Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. Join one of the most iconic names in wealth management, Merrill. You'll be part of a dynamic team of advisors and specialists working hard every day to grow their clients' wealth. And with the support of best-in-class research, advanced digital tools, and the resources of a global institution, it's truly an opportunity you can be bullish about. Learn more at careers.bankofamerica.com. Copyright 2024, Bank of America Corporation.
I don't know if this is a generational thing or if this is a youth thing, but there's a lot of like, my life is over, I can't do anything else, I'm ready to pack it up. From the outside, I'm like, oh, this is so ridiculous. We're 21 years old. Like, how can you say your life is over? But then I think about the fact that like the world is so confusing. It's really frustrating to sit in the unknown.
Welcome to How To. I'm Courtney Martin. Do you remember how confusing, how totally frustrating it was to be 21 years old? This is much longer ago for some of us than others, obviously. But even though I am twice that age, I remember the feeling of being 21 so vividly. I lived in this railroad apartment in Brooklyn with my bestie, Christina, and my big brother, Chris. I had this horrible job as some real estate tycoon's assistant. I remember sitting in her high-rise office in Midtown. She smoked long, skinny cigarettes while I tried to figure out how to do a mail merge. There was other stuff I was trying to figure out too. I wanted to be a writer, but I was so far from it. I was totally disillusioned with politics. And this may not surprise you, I was broke. I wanted to hit fast forward on my life so frickin' bad. To zoom past mail merges and rejection letters from editors and to just enjoy the good life, whatever that meant. Some of you might be thinking, you were 21. Nobody has it all figured out at that age. But I think Gen Z might have it even worse for a whole bunch of reasons. Climate change, economic inequality, political polarization, war, pandemics. I mean, it's crazy out there, y'all. Joining us to explain why Gen Z has it so much worse than we did is a very special guest.
Hi, my name is Ezra, and I'm the next generation. I am Generation Z. I am 21 years old. I'm living in Oakland, greatest city in the world.
Woo-woo. You see, Ezra isn't just a fellow resident of the Bay Area, a real talker, an unforgettable character. He is also the son of my How To co-host, Carvel Wallace. He's navigating many of the same challenges I once did, but the pressures and questions he faces are uniquely shaped by today's world.
I work with kids at a after-school program. I learn a lot from them. I remember what it was like to be that age and how simple it was just knowing that I could either do this today or I could do that today. Even if I didn't have a choice over the matter, I do remember that feeling of there is sort of a binary, and so as I've grown older, what's been left is kind of an absence, right? Like a big question mark.
Sounds like you have some nostalgia for that time, this big wide range of life that at 21 years old you're faced with confronting feels a lot different than being 5 years old and deciding, do you want strawberry or chocolate ice cream?
I literally was having a conversation with a friend recently, and they were just like, I love being a working adult with responsibilities, a job, and a places to be during the day, but what I wouldn't give to go back in time to just waking up with the world being your oyster and fun all day. I just feel so uncertain all the time, and also just kind of uncertain of what the point of being uncertain is, or just like being in general. And so for a long time, and especially recently as I've been getting older and my life has become, more and more uncertain, I have sort of relied on the idea of angel numbers and cosmic destiny. So I've recently been obsessed with fate.
Ezra is clearly wrestling with big questions. What is the purpose of life? What is my purpose? And how much is it in my control, really? These are all super useful questions that are overwhelming as hell. To help us wade through the metaphysical anxieties and learn how to figure out a life path that feels true to you, something a bit more practical, I'm bringing in someone who has helped a lot of young people find their purpose.
My name is Andrew McPeak. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm the vice president of a nonprofit called Growing Leaders. And I get to spend my days writing and speaking and thinking about the next generation and how to get them ready for the world they're entering into.
And what generation do you consider yourself?
I am a millennial. I was born in 1988.
I was born the last hour of the last day of the 70s, Andrew.
Okay.
So does that make me the oldest millennial ever? Or do you consider that like Gen X?
Most people would call you a tweener, which means that you were probably influenced in both directions. And typically people are going to claim based on how they grew up, which is a reminder that generations are a little bit art and a little bit science at the same time.
I just want to point out here that both of today's guests have built their lives around people from the next generation. Andrew's a millennial who works with Gen Z, and Ezra is a Gen Zer who works with Gen Alpha. Those are kids born starting in 2010.
It's very, very cool. Every generation passes on what they know to another, and that doesn't wait until we're 40 or 50. That begins even at Ezra's age at 21. But yeah, I mean, every individual is unique. And I'm always careful when we talk about generations not to lump a whole group of people together and go, they're all the same, right? However,
Right.
I would say that we are right now seeing some trends in Generation Z, the questions they're asking, the challenges they're facing. They got a certain version of the world that we adults curated for them. And even though they're all processing it perhaps a little bit differently, I'm not surprised to hear Ezra asking some of the questions that he's asking.
So today on the show, finding the good life when the future feels, well, bleak as hell. We are going to be talking a lot about Gen Z in this conversation, but this advice can apply to anyone who wants to feel a little more control over their destiny, or at least what they're focusing on day to day. Stay with us. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. When you use Apple Card on your iPhone, you'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Apply now in the Wallet app on your iPhone. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs, Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com. We're back with our expert, Andrew McPeak, and Ezra, the son of my co-host, Carvel Wallace. Now, if you're familiar with the show, you may know that Carvel released a memoir this year. But that's not the first time his work has gotten personal. For years, he was a parenting advice columnist and co-host of Slate's Care and Feeding podcast, which means that Carvel's parenting, and in some ways Ezra's upbringing, has kind of been on blast. An interesting experience for any kid.
My experience of my father being, my parent is, I feel like, almost so different from the experience of my father in the public eye or in
Right.
parenting advice or whatnot. Like, it's like, well, of course, your father has some big shoes for you to fill. And it's like, I've always felt that way. Mainly in the idea that it's like, oh, well, he's got it all figured out. At least he's strong in his convictions. But it's like, I may stray from the path, right? I may end up in New York, drunk, trying to get home at like 4 a.m, throwing up in a subway station. Not that happened to me. It's just a hypothetical situation. But I'm just saying, like, happened to a friend. But basically, it's like, I may end up far away from the path, far away from home, but home base is still there. Growing up, my friends would get high around their parents. And I remember always thinking that I'd be like, man, I could never be high around my dad. And I'm thinking about why. And it's like, it's because like, he just be knowing the truth.
Andrew, I want to float an idea here, which is when I hear Ezra talking about his parenting, I'm reminded a bit of the parenting I experienced too. And I'm wondering about like, as you're in your 20s, as you're sort of coming of age, trying to figure out your life, you're always responding in some way to your parents' generation, right? To whatever was set out to you to believe, either explicitly or implicitly, was the path to like a good life, right? Good being in quotes. So, my parents had this totally rigid, delusional American dream idea of what the quote unquote good life was. So my parents had their existential crisis related to that, right? My parents raised me as Ezra was raised, with this sense of being like deeply seen, like there was no hiding, and also kind of a like, follow your bliss, follow your path, like, financial realities are real and you have to figure that out, but also like, we're not going to tell you what the good life is. So that is its own existential terror, right? When you have parents that aren't passing down dogma. So you don't have something rigid to respond to. You have to respond to this like far more real, deep sense of being seen fully and also being like unleashed on the world, as broad and varied as it is. So are you seeing that, Andrew, that this generation who got that kind of parenting without as much dogma has a special set of existential quandaries to deal with?
I think you hit the nail on the head. What you're identifying, we often talk about as a pendulum. Each generation sort of pendulum shifts back and forth. And it is certainly about how we lead our kids, but it's also about how we view our place in reality. We find that most generations push back against the generation right before them. As a parent, you sort of craft for your child a reality for them to live in. It's almost like sheep on a farm. And so you build these fences on your farm for your child to live in. And what happens as they reach adolescence is that they're actually tearing up that fence. They're pulling it out post by post by post and questioning everything about what they've been handed, right? So if I was handed really strict dogma, as previous generations were, and as you said, I'm going to rip that dogma up. But if I am handed this kind of really wide open view of how reality works, then I'm going to start to rip up some of that. And it's a really interesting trend that we see with Generation Z, right? They have grown up in a world that was more open to ideas, more kind of wide open in its acceptance of different ideas as well. And yet we often see them making very, very binary choices, to use his term. It's almost like they're trying to put as many things into categories as possible, in some ways even more aggressively than the generation right before them, the millennials, even did.
The tendency to push back on your upbringing feels like it could be written off as ongoing teenage rebellion. But I think it's actually deeper than that. We learn based on observation, and we have the closest contact with our parents' generation. So it's no wonder that we try to make deliberate adjustments away from the way it was in order to create our own good life, kind of redefine it. Let's just say it's easier to reject a well-worn path than to blaze your own trail. Ezra, do you have a conception of the good life, or do you think that's just a bullshit concept?
Well, it's of course the bullshit concept. I mean, there's no good life under a society where you're selling your labor and your soul for a paycheck. I mean, people will straight up tell you, like, in my generation, like, well, obviously we're all just working for, like, bullshit, you know? And so I think that's why we are seeing a return to things like vaping or, like, just all this nihilist shit, like doom scrolling and stuff, because it's like, you know, why do you want to live another, like, 20 years, another 30 years to watch the world degrade?
It sounds like, tell me if this is part of what you're saying, that there is no good life in a time and place where the forces of, like, you know, late stage capitalism, climate change, etc., are so out of control and so damaging that it doesn't feel like on an individual or even a relational, communal level that you can create a good life within those forces. Is that part of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I guess I was getting at the best you could do is fake it. The best you could do is, like, laugh at it, right? You know, make a joke out of it, make a meme out of it, you know?
Now, Ezra, you're sending me into an existential tailspin because I'm like, have I been faking it for 20 years? Maybe. But despite what I perceived of as all these fucked up forces when I was in my 20s, I also did still have faith in this idea that I individually and relationally could create goodness, could create beauty, could create meaning. And so that kept me going.
This is so good, this conversation, because in a world in which we're rejecting this idea of the good life, we're still talking about it, right? And I think that's what we're ultimately getting at is when we talk about the good life, we're obviously not talking about one definition of what a successful life looks like. We're asking, is it possible for each of us individually to find our definition of the good life? The big difference, Courtney, between Gen X or millennials that I grew up in and the generation that Ezra is a part of, Generation Z, is awareness. Our generation marched during our college years for climate change and against global warming, and all of those issues were really important to us. So we knew that those things were going on. We were highly aware of the world and its problems, but not aware in the way that Generation Z is aware. Ezra has grown up in the generation that not only can you get that information in your pocket at any point, right? But that information actually comes and finds you through notifications. I go to many schools where students in the hallways find out about a school shooting that happened 2 states over faster than the teachers do. And we're talking about elementary and middle school students, not just high school and college age students. And so that's, I would say, is one of the really interesting things that's happening here is it's hard, I think, for Ezra, and I don't want to reduce your comments, Ezra, down too much, but it would be hard for you to believe that optimism was a possibility because your world is absolutely inundated with all of the negative things that are going on. If you were, though, to suddenly cut yourself off from all of that, right? So maybe like throw your iPhone out and don't check the news for a while, and you were to only focus on the world around you, your friends, your community, the place where you're going to work, I think it wouldn't be long before you started to see some positives in that world that you're around, which is things like joy, things like purpose and meaning. Those things actually can be found around you.
What Andrew is recommending, turning towards your sphere of control, is an interesting way to deal with feeling powerless amid the onslaught of global crises. It may feel like you're neglecting larger issues, but you can still stay informed. Just take that anger or fear you feel and focus on changing something you care about in your local community. Your sense of purpose, meaning, and joy will be reflected back at you in the eyes of the people you're impacting every single day. Trust me, that reflection will be far more meaningful than what you see in the funhouse mirror that is social media or apocalyptic news headlines.
Ezra, if you were to think about the impact you were making in the lives of those kids that you're spending time with, how much more joy you bring to their day, how much more meaning you bring to it, and you were to process the good life that I could have here on the world through the lens of those interactions, I think you might begin to see it a little bit differently, right? And so that's why I would say it all comes down to awareness and it comes down to perspective. If I'm inundated with a world that says everything sucks, everything sucks, everything sucks, then I'm going to start to think that everything sucks, right? But if I'm caught up in a world where I'm able to make an impact, and yeah, sure, there's some hard things that I face, but I'm ultimately able to influence the world around me, then I think that really helps. And honestly, if you're growing up in a world where the world is happening to you and the notifications and all of that stuff, of course you're going to feel like it's all up to fate. It's all happening to me. I don't have that much control, because what in the world could I do about a problem that's on the other side of the world? The answer is, of course, nothing, but we can do a whole lot about the world that's right around us.
The fact that I grew up in a world where we walked out of school to protest school shootings, like that was like my first school walkout. But then, you know, school shootings still continued to happen and we felt so powerless. We feel like a failure. At least I feel like a failure. And that's the real.
Ezra, are you saying you personally feel like a failure?
I do feel like a failure personally. I failed at life. I failed at creating a life that works. I feel like I failed at the good life, as you know, that sort of abstract concept that we're discussing, right? Like I feel like I failed at like figuring out what it is, really just being successful enough to fake it. And so I'm stuck here left with the questions of like, well, what is the meaning of it all? What is the sort of like point, right? When it's really a distraction from kind of getting my life together in a way.
Can I ask you, when you say getting my life together, is there a picture in your mind? Like, what does that look like? Yeah,
for me, there is. I mean, if I were to get my life together, I would be out of the city for sure. I would be in the country and in nature. I would have a community. I would have love, like romantic interests. I would have like lots of fun and, lots of time to like think and be free of sort of the stress of getting my life together, right? It's almost like I have a belief that relationally and in my personal life that I could be something that I want to be, that I could live a successful life, whatever that looks like. But it's like, what's the point?
You know what, Ezra, as I'm listening to you, I'm feeling one word so strongly, which is tenderness. Like there's a tenderness to the way you're talking about the good life you imagine, and a tenderness to the way you talk about your love of people. And it feels like that's juxtaposed with just like the brutalness of this moment. And I think, Andrew, you were speaking to some of that with like the cell phone in your pocket and how it's brutal. I mean, it's brutal. It's an assault on us cognitively, emotionally.
I see that too. And I think this is the kind of thing that older generations look at and start to say things like, you guys are soft, or snowflake generation, or whatever it is because they don't know how to process what went wrong. But here's the thing is like the things that I think Ezra is talking about, like I wrote down, he wanted space and he wanted to be in nature, not the city. And he wanted time and he wanted love, like all of those things. That's the same stuff that every generation looks for, right? Courtney, you spoke to this really well. There's a contradiction between that desire and the world that I am inundated in. And so it feels like that desire is illogical, fantasy, a mistaken optimism, rather than, I think, stepping back and asking, what are the things I could do right now to begin to move in that direction? If that's where I really want to be, my ability to get there is actually still in my control. It comes down to the choices I make and my ability to set a long-term goal and to work towards it in order to get there.
Andrew, I really appreciate how sort of emotionally you're speaking, and I think it's easy, especially for someone like me, to just get caught up in the like sort of larger general societal picture of it all and what's going on with the world and not what's going on with me.
When something bad happens in the world, we react. And it happens enough that it probably feels subconscious at this point, almost like muscle memory. But here's the thing. Our reactions are a muscle we can train. you can intentionally shift your mindset, intentionally focus on your sphere of control, intentionally choose joy and love. Now, that may sound Pollyannish or difficult, but it really does lead to a more mentally nourishing, grounded life. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to train those muscles of change and develop a clearer sense of agency. Andrew's also going to answer a very small question that Ezra has.
What is the meaning of life, Andrew?
Some people think self-care is indulgent. You know firsthand that's a myth. And you know what else is a myth? That Discover isn't widely accepted. The truth is, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard that right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. What better excuse to take your self-care Sunday out of the house and into the occasional spa visit? It pays to Discover, based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
Gift the remarkable with Marc Jacobs fragrances this holiday season. From the iconic Daisy and Perfect to the all-new Daisy Wild, Marc Jacobs perfume gift sets include everything she needs to feel special. From her favorite fragrance, plus the matching travel spray, holiday gifts don't get much more perfect than this. So if you're looking for a gift inspiration these holidays, gift the remarkable with Marc Jacobs.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
We're back with Ezra, a 21-year-old who is trying to figure out his life, and our expert, Andrew McPeak. In the 1950s, a psychologist named Julian Rotter studied college students to see how they perceived the world. He found that there are two mindsets present in absolutely everyone.
One he called an internal locus of control. That was somebody who said, if it is to be in the world, in my life, it is up to me, right? So I see myself as being empowered, and I see myself as being able to shape my life and the realities around me. And the other view that he saw in his studies of college students was this idea of an external locus of control. And these were people who said, it doesn't really matter what I do. There's either going to be some fate that happens, or an external force, or something, an adult in my life, or a president or politician who's really powerful. They're going to make a decision, and that's ultimately going to determine the trajectory of my life. And when he did this research back in the 50s, the students that he studied had far more internal locus of control than they did external, meaning that they were far more of the belief that if it is to be, it's up to me. His study got picked back up by a group of researchers starting in the early 2000s, actually. So with the millennial generation. And what they found is that we had experienced a flip, that the younger generations rising up today are experiencing more external locus of control than internal, meaning that they're walking around in the world feeling like the world is like constantly deciding things for me or shaping things for me. What they find is that those people are far more likely to experience anxiety and stress in their life in general, but also about the choices that they're making. Meaning, the more I feel like my life is out of my control, the more anxiety I feel about my life.
To be fair to the younger generations, life is more controlled. Youth sports are super formal these days. After school activities are almost exclusively official programs. School itself is more regimented. I mean, look, algorithms even control their entertainment choices. It can feel like they're in a world of endless opportunities, but yet so many meaningful choices are being made for them.
Why is it surprising to us that once you get out of those really prescribed experiences and you enter into adulthood, that all of a sudden you realize you've got a muscle that has atrophied? You haven't learned how to make decisions for yourself. And so you haven't gotten the opportunity or the experience of making some of those choices. And so it feels like all of it's out of your control. Only the big difference now is that there aren't any adults who are telling you what to do anymore. My concern is that a lot of times when we threw out the definitions of the good life, we accidentally also threw out the skills to find your own good life, right?
The life skills, man. That's what it's about. And that's why I really like what Andrew is saying is like, if you have the habits, then you have something to fall back on. And I think that's where I'm saying those that grew up and said, okay, I'm going to do my homework. I'm going to wake up at this time. I'm going to go to sleep at this time. I'm going to do what needs doing, versus people that were like, man, what can I do to have fun today? One has built a habit and a pattern of behavior that they can still have existential questions. Why am I doing this? What's the point? Whatever. But they still have the habit.
I do want to say one other thing when it comes to what habits you actually want to form. I actually think it should come back to the idea of what you value. And I know that term value has been co-opted politically and otherwise, but it actually is a really good word with a lot of really good roots. Value ultimately comes down to, what do I care about, or how do I want to be known? So if I'm helping a young person decide, what are my values? Like, what do I actually care about? How do I want to be known? The question I often ask is, if your best friend in the world, somebody who knew you really, really well, was asked to describe you in just a couple of words, what are some of the words that you hope they would use to describe you?
Let's do that right now.
Okay, let's do it.
Let's ask Ezra
let's
that.
do it. I'm not going to give any examples. Ezra, if your best friend in the world was asked to describe you, what are some of the words you hope that person would use to describe you?
Good listener. Lots of love for the friend, lots of love for the person that's saying this. Reliable, consistent, refreshing, right? Chill. I mean, hope is hard, because it's like, it includes so much of like what I feel like I'm not there, but
that's okay. Because what it is, Ezra, is it's a starting point. You said some great words. They just rattled off your brain. Caring, great at listening. I'm refreshing, and I'm chill. I'm laid back, right? Consistent. I show love to other people. I'm reliable. Those are amazing values. Yeah. And I think you would probably say, Ezra, that if I was that person with all of my friends, I would be pretty proud of who I am. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. No, I would. I would feel proud of who I am.
So then, Andrew, how does Ezra use that as a wayfinding?
So this is why I like using the word value to describe these. Is values are things you add, right? We use this terminology, the phrase of adding value, right? What I would recommend is write these words down, look at them, and then go, have I been adding this value to the people around me? So like caring. Think about your interactions for the past week. What did I show care to those people? Or even asking the question, okay, thinking towards the future, what would a caring person do for their friends? Or how about being reliable? Have I been reliable? And in what ways could I be more reliable? I would say if you're thinking about habits you want to build habits around these ideas, because then you're building a habit that's going to help you become the person that you say you want to be, right? And that's what it ultimately comes down to. And it's a reminder, Ezra, too, that like the things we're looking for when we talk about the good life have nothing to do with money or a specific job or any of those things. They come down to the way we make people feel, right? It come down to our generosity and how we add value to the people around us. And when we're doing that, it really doesn't matter how much money is in our bank account, right? It really doesn't matter what the job title underneath of our name on our email address says. Like ultimately it's going to come down to, did I make somebody's day this week? Did I add value in the way that I believe I am uniquely gifted to be able to add that value? And when we identify that, it's pretty powerful.
It sort of answers that question. What's the point? The point is to live in alignment with your values. I like that it's this more open-ended, first of all, identify what your values are. And then it's like, well, people will remember you for how you made them feel. And so that thing I always think of, well, we're all just going to end up in the same place. I could go to Yale for 8 years and study freaking medicine and then end up as a doctor and living in Piedmont. Or I could, work in Amazon and end up living in the East, and just live another different, in a socioeconomic sense, a different life. But at the end of the day, it's about how we made people feel. What we did with the time when we had it.
It's not so much what they're doing, it's how they're going about doing that, right? We've all met super wealthy people who are complete assholes, right? And I would say they might have achieved some version of monetary success, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're living the good life. That's a totally different thing. Instead, I would say the higher the quality of human being you are, right, the more you're embodying those values that you want to be true about you, the more people are going to want to be around you. The more people are going to go, you know what, Ezra, I'm doing this thing. I'd love for you to come along, and maybe you might make a little money doing that, whatever it is. But I just think when you make people feel joy and meaning and man, I feel like I'm better because I spent time with Ezra, that opens up all kinds of possibilities that you could never have seen coming. And I want to give you one quote around this too, because I heard this from a leader and it was so eye-opening to me. And this leader said, "Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. Do for one what you wish you could do for everyone." And I think that is totally in line with this conversation too, is you are going to get alerts on your phone about some huge issue going on in the world. And I would say, take all of the frustration and anxiety and all the things that come up when you see that, because that problem probably is beyond your control, right? And channel that towards somebody who is in your general vicinity and go, you know what? I can't solve that problem, but I can serve this person or add value to this person or do something kind or caring for this person. And when we start thinking like that, like you said, I think it's a much more hopeful way to live.
Something that I just keep thinking about is Courtney actually saying, well, I felt like when I was in my 20s that although obviously I knew that the world was fucked, it's I knew that I could connect with others in a way that was meaningful, that I could build social connections that I could control and that I had power over and that I had some sort of influence in creating in a sort of positive way. It's however negative the outside world was, it was I knew that my connections were solid, and just how different I feel now and how that I've sort of extrapolated that powerlessness over the world to a powerlessness over my own life. And so, just not throwing out the sort of life skills with the sort of abstract idea of a great successful life.
I don't think that could have been better articulated, Ezra. That was so beautiful.
I 100% agree with that. When I see somebody begin to realize the tools they have at their disposal to make the world around them different in the way that they really want to see it happen, it's powerful, right? It's the true embodiment of this idea of empowerment is you have more to offer the world than maybe even you give yourself credit for. And even just spending a little bit of time with you, Ezra, that seems readily apparent to me. You have so much to offer the world. And in a lot of ways, the world around you is waiting for you to bring it.
Ezra, do you have any last question for Andrew as we wind down? Anything either, philosophical or concrete that you just have to get in here before we hang up?
What is the meaning of life, Andrew? Because I want to get as many perspectives on this as possible, and you're extremely qualified, right?
Was it, Courtney may remember this, Ezra, but was it Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that said the meaning of life was 42?
42. Yes.
I think I have a few more thoughts than just a number, but there's kind of two values we often have in life. Our resume values are one. That's the stuff that we've done. I got this degree. I worked at this job. I made this much money, all of those kinds of things. Those things don't often come up in eulogies, right? Because that's not what people remember about people. They don't remember how much money you had or any of those kinds of things, the sort of material possessions or accomplishments or any of the things that we often, by the way, post a lot about on Instagram and TikTok and some of those things. We're kind of obsessed in those spaces with our resume. I think instead what people talk about would be what I would call your eulogy virtues, right? Not your resume virtues, but your eulogy virtues. The things about you that shaped the people around you. They're going to talk about how you made them feel. And so if that is true, I cannot help but think that the meaning of life, of what we do with our lives, comes down to what we do for other people. The closest thing I can get to an answer to that question, Ezra, is if you make your life about how you are impacting other people, the difference that you're making in their lives, then you will get to the end of your life, and I think you will feel like it was well lived.
Yeah.
And Ezra, I will add one thing just want to say is I heard you say that you want to be known as a good listener, and to me, that is the deepest form of generosity, is the way you pay attention to people, the way you listen to them. So I think you're already focused on that. The other thing is I did a show actually with your dad about the fact that I'm taking care of my dad who has dementia, and it's pretty advanced. And I will tell you that one of the deepest things I've learned from that and mothering is that sometimes the generosity is so physical and not intellectual. It's like to sit with my dad and hold his hand and just like talk about the birds we're seeing. For me, is like I sit in those moments and I'm like, oh, this is what matters in life. You know, it's just like so basic and fundamental and physical. And same with my daughters. Like if they find me to be a safe home to like, you know, crawl into bed with me at night and like read next to each other, like that's the meaning of life. And so for me, the generosity doesn't have to be large. It can just be like so small and so physical.
Yeah, I like that. Just sitting, watching the birds, holding a loved one's hand, you know, that seems like a good answer.
Yeah, take that, late stage capitalism.
Oh, I actually forgot about late stage capitalism for a second. Holy shit.
We're loving our people. We're loving our
That's
people.
That's right. We're under an oligarchy, guys. What?
Oh, no.
Oh, my goodness.
I shouldn't have reminded
we
you.
Were doing so well. We were doing so well.
Oh my God, you guys are the best.
This has been part 1 of the new podcast, The Meaning of Life, with Andrew, Courtney, and Ezra. Tune in next week where we answer, does life even have a meaning?
Thank you to Andrew McPeak for such insightful advice. Check out his work at Growing Leaders. Thank you also to Ezra for being so open and generous with your time. Speaking of late-stage capitalism, our bonus episode today is all about finding the perfect mattress. Okay, my co-host, to be known as Ezra's father thenceforth, has some advice for picking the dream one that also stays in the budget. Sometimes it's the little things that help you feel like your life is together, you know? If you aren't already a Slate Plus member, you can subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the How To show page, or visit slate.com/how-to+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available for you to listen to right now. We'll see you there. Do you have a fundamental question about the universe that we can definitely solve? Send us a note at howto@slate.com or leave us a voicemail at 646-495-4001, and we might have you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, please give us a rating and review and tell a friend. Send it to your favorite Gen Zer. That will help us help more people. This episode was produced by Kevin Bendis and Rosemary Belson. Joel Meyer is senior editor, and Derek John is executive producer. Merritt Jacob is senior technical director and composed our theme music. Charles Duhigg created the show. Ezra's dad is my co-host. I'm Courtney Martin. Thanks for listening.